Good morning, everyone. We are in Perek Memvav 46, Pasuk Aleph, and in Perek Memvav, we introduce already the destruction. Really, the theme of this is the destruction of Bavel, the rise of Cyrus, of Koresh. So this is, again, as I had mentioned last week, among the prakim, which to those who don't believe in real prophecy, that a prophet can really foretell the truth, one of the great challenges, because how is it possible that a prophet could prophesize something about something that was a couple of hundred years away? It must be wrong because you can't use you. How would you know the name Cyrus? And for the rest of us, we say, wait a second, he's a prophet. That's what prophets do. They tell the future. And so they should be able to know that kind of detail. It's not a problem. For those who have the problem, that's part of the reason that they say this is not the same Yeshayahu, that there's a second Yeshayahu. And for those of us who have the faith and the belief, we say, no, this is just Yeshayahu had switched gears. You're allowed to switch gears when you're in a series of prophecies because there are different purposes. Just think for a moment, David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, with his various books that he wrote. I think David HaMelech, in terms of the various Tehillim that he wrote, they're switching back and forth. So here in this parak, we start out not just with the destruction of the Babylonian Empire, but we talk about the destruction of the Babylonian faith. The Babylonians were pagans. Babylonians had taken the Jews into exile. The Persian Empire was going to rise after them, the Median Persian Empire, they rise after him. And Cyrus being the first king, it's actually, he's he was also with Darius the Mede together originally, but he is the one who's going to give permission to build the Beit HaMikdash. He's also the one who's going to put the Beit HaMikdash, the building of the Beit HaMikdash, on hold, the Sitna that he issued. He's going to put it on hold for about 14 years, but ultimately he's the one who is going to be in some ways a redeemer. In fact, we'll see in this parak that there's a pasuk that we're not sure if it's talking about Avram Avinu, Koresh, Cyrus, or the Melech HaMashiach himself, or the ultimate Messiah. Okay, because all of them, he does bring about the Geulah. Cyrus is the instrument HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses to have the Jews come back to Eretz Yisrael. Shoshi, you had a question?
I don't think that David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech compared to Tehillim, etc. All this Sfarim were Nevuah. They were written with but they're not. I mean,
Ruach HaKodesh. Yeah, okay. So we can Ruach HaKodesh. We can take this. By the way, Shosh, we can take this back to. For instance, we can take this back to even the Chumash itself. When you come to Sefer Dvarim, even Sefer Dvarim, you look at Sefer Dvarim. You look at the Orach Chaim in the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, which is a very famous Orach Chaim who questions really who is the author of Sefer Dvarim. And the explanations we have to give, but there is a very different tone. It's a farewell address. It's written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Obviously, it was written by God. We accept it as obviously as one of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. It's all part of God, but it has a different tone. It shifts. If I am in the world of non-believers or people who don't accept the concept of Torah Sinai in the same way we understand it, they say no. This is written by it was written by Moses, or it was written by one of the 5 different authors of the Torah that goes back to the Wissenschaft des Judentum, of the science of Judaism in the period of the Haskalah. And it continues to this day, okay? Those kinds of pieces. Kasuto has a wonderful piece that just destroys all of those theories. Even though Kasuto was a professor of Bible as well at Hebrew University, he has a wonderful piece, a wonderful little book about it. Now, with all that long introduction, let's get into it. So it starts out, Karabel, Kores, that first Bel bows down. Bel is not a figure in Beauty and the Beast. Bel is the primary god of the Babylonians. And not only did Bel bow down, but also Kores Nevo, but also another one of the idols bows down. Rav Schwab talks about the fact that what happens here is that when the Persians overthrow the Babylonians, the pagan faith of multiple gods shifts to just 2 gods, to the god of light and the god of darkness. The god of light is Ahura Mazda, okay? Ahura Mazda is the one of goodness, and the god of darkness, Ahriman, is the god of evil. So he moves from these multiple gods, there's a god of the sun and a god of this and a god, down to two gods. It's still paganism. But these two gods overwhelm. In other words, the previous gods are falling down. Yeah. Overwhelming the Babylonian gods. Right. And Rashi says all of this is just this is mockery. What the Navi is doing, he's mocking the gods of the Babylonians. Rashi says, Lashon tzchok. They were just making fun of them. That all of a sudden that they're bending down, they're bowing down, they're giving up. Okay, that because once Bavel is captured, everything changes. Their idols became for animals and for wild animals, for chayot and for behemot. What does it mean? The Radak says that all of their idols were being carried away by beasts of burden. Why were they being carried away? Because they had precious metals. They were covered in gold and silver, and so they were being robbed to be able to be taken back to Persia for the purposes of their value. The Malbim says Atzabem is not referring to the idols. It's actually referring to the faces of the Babylonians, that the faces of the Babylonians actually changed when they were conquered, when their idols were overthrown. It was like they were wild animals at this point, the Babylonians themselves. Nesuotechem amusot, the ones who buried them were burdened, were packed, were masal ayefa, and this burden of carrying these idols was overwhelming. It was exhausting. Now, that's the Ibn Ezra says very simply. They got so many of these idols all over the place, and they're schlepping it. There's so much silver and gold that's being plundered by the Persians that it's just an overwhelming act that's taking place. Rabbi Victor Belgansi says it's a little bit different. Okay, he says that now this is referring to the Babylonians. You once thought that these idols were the ones who carried you. Now they've become a burden to you as well. The Malbim says that ultimately there was so much. The way they used to worship some of these idols is they would adorn them with jewelry, and it's so heavy to schlep them. It's really exhausting to schlep them around. Now that's opening piece. Opening pieces, they're done. Karsu, charu, yachdav. The idols both bowed and they bent down together. Lo yachlu malet masa. They couldn't escape from their burden. The Shadal says that ultimately they weren't able, because they were so loaded, the Babylonians, in trying to escape even, they were trying to schlep their own stuff, according to Shadal. Trying to escape, they couldn't escape fast enough. They ultimately went into captivity. There is a Rashi on this. Rashi quotes from the Gemara Megillah. And Rashi gets a little bit descriptive. Well, yeah, it's a little bit, if we really want to insult someone, even in the ancient world, you want to insult someone, you talk about bodily functions. Okay. And so as a result, that the idols, when it says lo yachlu malet masa, they were not able to go to the bathroom. Let's put it the nicest possible way. They were constipated, the idols. Okay, and I'm using very nice terms. The Gemara Megillah is a little bit more descriptive than that. It's all the way they mock them. We just want to mock them. They couldn't do anything. Shim'u elai Beit Yaakov. And now the Navi turns to the Jewish people. And he says, listen to me, Beit Yaakov, v'chol she'erit Beit Yisrael, and all of those who remain from Yisrael. Remember, Yaakov Yisrael is talking about two aspects of the Jewish people. Yaakov is the Jewish people who unfortunately are downtrodden. Yisrael are the people who are the princely people, but we're referring to them as the remnants. Why is it referred to the remnants? So that Mikra says the remnants, because no matter how lofty the Jewish people's goals were and how great they may have been, as much as they may have represented Yisrael, they've suffered in the Churban. There's only some that remain. Just like nowadays, we talk about the Sherita Pleta, those who survived the Shoah, or the She'erit. Here also, there was a She'erit that survived the Babylonian exile. And we say to them, Ha'amusim minevatan. They have been born by HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the womb, from when they were just beginning. Okay, that ultimately I have taken care of them. Rav Hirsch says this is talking about from the moment of Mitzrayim, from the moment the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has taken care of them. Hanesuim mini rachem, and it's a parallel phrase that ultimately Mitzudat David says clearly is just parallel. Also, they have been carried from the womb. Listen to me, Jewish people, says God. God says to them very simply, you are now going to be coming back there to Israel. Realize that despite everything that you're seeing in front of you, I have taken care of you from the first days of your nationhood. I'm there. Va'ad zignanihu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, not only I take care of you from the beginning, I'm going to take care of you through your entire existence until your old age, from before you were born until after. Rashi actually says, what's the idea of zikna here? Zikna is, I will take care of you from when you were defenseless, in a sense, to when you may not be able to do everything that you wanted to do, when you may not have your zchuyot, you may not have the natural zchuyot. I'm not just your God when you're in your prime. I'm your God from the beginning and through the end, all through. Anihu, I'm God. The ad seva ani esbol, and I will carry you. I'll carry your burdens, okay, until your last days. Ani asiti vani asa. I created you, and I will carry you. Vani esbol v'amalet, and I will carry the load, and I will deliver your salvation. Now, what is all of happening here? Says the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra says, wait a second. The first part is talking about the idols. And what happened to the idols? They were carried off. The idols were made by humanity. They were carried off for their silver and the gold. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, in contradistinction to those umot olam, to those nations of the world, they who make their gods and they who carry their gods, your God made you, and your God will carry you. And that's how Pasuk Daled fits into the first section. Says the Navi at this point, Lemi tidamyuni v'tashvu. Says, now, who can compare it to me? Who can you compare it to me? And who can you equate to me? According to the Radak, this is a comment that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making to the Babylonians. He's telling the Babylonians, you thought that your gods were equivalent to me? Your gods were made by human beings. I am the real God. According to the Abarbanel, he rejects that. And the Abarbanel rejects it. And the reason he says it is because if you look at Pasuk Gimel, verse 3, is directed to the Jewish people. Shimu elai Beit Yaakov v'chol sherit Beit Yisrael. God is talking to the Jews. If God's talking to the Jews and he says, to whom can you compare me? To whom can you equate me? That comment must also be to the Jewish people. And therefore, he's talking to all of them, that he's giving them rebuke, saying, how could you have ever even considered an alternative to me? How is it at all possible? V'tamshiluni v'nidmeh. Who have you ever compared to me and tried to make that comparison? Now, it's interesting. I don't know how it appears in your Tanachim. In my Tanakh, there's actually a break between the end of Pasuk Daled and the beginning of Pasuk Hey. There's a short break. That short break is, if you remember, there are two kinds of paragraph breaks. There is what's called a parsha ptucha and a parsha stuma. Okay, in the good old-fashioned chumashim, there was a pei and a samach. Okay, nowadays they took away all of our fun. When I was a kid, we used to play chumash baseball with the pays and the samach. There was all sorts of things you had to do. Okay, can't do it anymore. But this kind of break is called a parshas duma, meaning that the end of the line is blocked. Okay, there's a beginning of a line, break is at least 10 yuds long, and then the end of the line. Normally, when that break means is something new but connected, but it is still something new. So it could be, like the Radak says, that that's enough of a break to go back to talking to the Babylonians. But it's not an absolute break. So that's why the Abarbanel says what he says. And then he says, has Zalim
Watch him here and listen to him here.
Okay.
and now what happens? And now what happens is that the Navi goes ahead and he does address the Babylonians. So again, Posuk Hey could be about the Babylonians, not because Posuk Gimel was about the Jews, but because Posuk Hey is definitely about the Babylonians. And what do? Hazalim Zahav Mikis. They interesting. How does Art Scroll translate the beginning of verse 6? Posuk Vav. Pour out. Okay. They pour out gold from their pockets. Pour. Now, pour means that this word, zalim, comes from the word nazal. Nun zayin lamed, to pour. Okay. Liquids are nozlim. It was a way to say a liquid. And so they pour out gold from their pockets. The Ibn Ezra says it comes from the word azal, which is related to nazal. Azal is to leave. In other words, they empty out their pockets. Huh? To leave. Yeah, they empty out their pockets. However, the Radak and the Ibn Kaspi and others say this doesn't come from Nun Zayin Lamed or Aleph Zayin Lamed. This comes from Zayin Vav Lamed. Zol. Okay, that what they do is, and he says very simply, it's milashon zol hefer shel yoker. It's the opposite of value. Hazalim zahav mikis. In other words, for the idolaters, gold, they would use as much gold as necessary for their idols. It was as if it was worthless, their gold. They just kept on using it. Either it has all the same piece. It's just a question what this word means. Either they just pour it out, which means freely, they empty it out, which is the same idea, or it just has no value. They just keep on spending it as well. Bekanem yishkolu. And they measure, bekesev bekaneh yishkolu. And they measure the silver with a kanem. Now, the simplest explanation, Rashi says a kaneh is a moznaim. They use the scales, which are balanced scales, right? So how does a balanced scale, a moznaim, work? By the way, how do you say moznaim in Yiddish, anyone? A vagshal. Okay, vagshal. That's why there's a book publisher called Moznaim. The family name is Vagshal. Okay, now, so they just translated their family name into Hebrew and made that the name of the book publisher. But you have, the way a scale works, obviously, is you have a bar across the top, right? I put a weight of an amount and I fill up the other side until they're even. That's the kanem. However, it's interestingly, Shadal says no. If they wanted, the Navi wanted to talk about the classic Moznaim scale, he should have said it. What does it mean? Bekesef bekaneh yishkolu. Shmuel David Lutzato says a kanem was a quick and dirty method of measuring. If you use a real scale, you get precise measurements. But when you wanted to do quick and dirty measurements, you'd just grab a stick, you'd put something in the middle, and yeah, it wasn't always perfect. Why? What does that mean? It means that they were willing to spend all of their silver to be able to do the pagans. They weren't medayik in the amount. They weren't careful about how much it was. There was no limit for them. So they needed a pound of silver. Okay, so it's a little bit less, a little bit more than a pound. Big deal. It's like nothing to them. So they did gross measurement is what the kaneh would mean. The kesef bekaneh yishkolu yiskiru tsoref v'yaseu el. So they go ahead and they hire a smith, and the smith makes for them a god. Yiskidu af yishtechavu. And then what do they do to this god? It was their money. They hired the guy to make them. And then all of a sudden, they're bowing down to this guy. Now, interestingly, what Schwab just points out, by the way, yiskidu, which means to bow, It has the same shorish as what word? A miskad. A miskad is a mosque. A mosque is the place of bowing. And in fact, and I cannot pronounce it, I tried this, I listened to it on Google Translate a few times. In Arabic, it's also the same, it's spelled in English Masjid, but it doesn't sound like masjid. Okay, it's got some extra sounds in there. But in Arabic also, the same word for bowing is the source of what you call a mosque. And now while we're at it, mosque comes from the same word as all. Misgad and mosque are the same word. It's the place of bowing. Here, they were bowing to their idols. They made them. They hired the guy to make them. And now all of a sudden they're sacred. How does that happen? Right? Yeshayahu al katef. They go ahead and they carry their idol, or they take them home from the store, the idol store. They carry them on their shoulders. Yisbiluhu, and they suffer on it. Now, yisbiluhu, lisbol, is to suffer, right? Yisbiluhu means when something's really heavy, it really is difficult to do so. They go through the action because it's so heavy. V'yanichu tachtav v'ya'amod, and they put it down. And it sits, it just stands there. It's fixed. Yamish. It is not going to move from its place. By the way, they start calling out to this idol. It doesn't answer him. And from the tsaris, it's not from a person's tsaris, from their troubles, it's never going to save them. In other words, we're just making fun of these idols. What's interestingly is this word af. It says, again, they carry it. It's a big burden to move it. They set it up. It doesn't move. Af, yitzak elav. How does ArtScroll translate something, cry out to it or yell to it? How does he translate it? Even. Okay, even. Okay. So even, there are two possibilities of what this word af can mean. Okay. Af could be just a vava chibur, which could be and he cries out to him, or it could be not only does this idol not move, but it doesn't even respond. So it can be, okay, just one more statement of fact, which is normally af, or it can be, by the way, it's bad enough that this idol doesn't move at all. This idol doesn't even do anything. Right, despite all the yelling. Okay. Now he went ahead, he mocks the Novi, mocks the idolaters. He started out by mocking the idols. Then you mock the people who make them. And then he turns now to the Jewish people. And he says, Zichru Zot. Remember this. Now, what is the Zot? What am I remembering? Zichru Zot. Remember what I just told you about idols. Remember that these idols are useless. They're meaningless. They're nothing. Hashivu poshim alev. And those, vehit oshashu, and strengthen yourselves. The Radak says vehit oshashu. What is the shorish? Ish. Okay. Now, ish, this is very politically incorrect, very sexist. Be a man. Strengthen yourselves. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Man up. Good. Ovihit oshashu. Hashivu poshim alev. Hashivu poshim alev is an interesting phrase. The Malbim says, all take this to heart. Taking something to heart, according to the Malbim, is understanding something at the lowest level. Okay. I don't want you to think about it too much, but just see what's going on. Realize what's going on. I want you to realize it. Now, Rav Schwab has a beautiful piece on this. And Rav Schwab's piece has a couple of steps to it. According to Chazal, in the time of the second Beit HaMikdash, the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah davened, and they eradicated the Yetzer Hara for idolatry among Jewish people. And in fact, if you notice, we don't have idolatry, okay? It wasn't, in fact, when you look at the Nevuot of the prophecies of second Beit HaMikdash, we're not yelling at them about idolatry. First Beit HaMikdash, one of the reasons it was destroyed was because of idolatry. The second Beit HaMikdash, the reason it was destroyed was sinat chinam, because Jews couldn't get along with one another, okay? So we got rid of idolatry. If that's the case, says Rav Schwab, then why would we have a Navi who's talking so much about idolatry. He wants us to remember how useless idolatry is. Well, that's nice. Okay, I remember idolatry is useless, but I had no interest in making my own God. I had no interest. So why bother with it? So Rav Schwab says like this, and I'm just going to read from the transcript of his shir. But Yeshayahu is also talking to future generations about other temptations that will arise in the future. While the temptation to worship idols will have disappeared, other attractions that are equally as strong, such as, for example, the desire to assimilate with the surrounding cultures, immoral sexual urges, and atheism will replace and plague the Jewish people in the future. The Navi is therefore prophesying to his nation, remember how people were once fascinated by Avodah Zarah and how it eventually lost all its attraction, just so you who are tempted by other equally powerful attractions, and even those of you may have already sinned, Hashivu Poshim Alev, that's why it says Poshim, take this to heart and stand up man-like to these urges, strengthen yourselves with your own historic God-given Jewish values, and you'll see that eventually these urges will disappear, become as unattractive as the old idolatry has become. So what he's saying is that we, in every generation, we have our own idolatries. It may not be the classic idolatry, it may not even be Ahura Mazda or the idolatries of the Persians, but there are things that we begin to worship. We find this in our culture very much. I mentioned a little bit about it yesterday, my drasha. There are things we worship that really are meaningless, but we have to remember that at the end of the days, that those things that aren't real are going to go fall apart, fall away. And therefore, just go for the real things instead. And now the Navi is going to shift even more. Once you get into Zichru, now I want you not only to remember what is negative, that the idols are useless, Zichru Rishonot Me'olam. The Navi says, I want you to remember the earliest events from the past. What would that be? Again, the Radak says that I took the Jews out of Egypt, even though the Jews didn't really want to leave Egypt, and their idols I made Belohem Asashfatim, and I've destroyed, I judged their idols, I got rid of their idols. Ki Anochi Kel. God says, I am God. Ve'enod Elokim, and there is no Elohim, there is no other God. Ve'efes Kamoni, and nothing is like me. The Abarbanel says this is talking not just about that moment, Bavel into Paras, first the exile of Bavel into the second Commonwealth building the Beit HaMikdash. He says it also is the same about the Geula Atida. You need to remember that God is God and only God. Magid Mereshit Acharit. Magid Mereshit Acharit, you know where that appears in our life cycle events? Okay, this is a phrase that we actually use in the Tanoim for a Chassan and Kala. Okay, Hamagid me'acharit l'reshit. Okay, that we use this term. Magid me'reshit acharit. We use this term actually in referring to God. Also, there's a sense of eternity. God is the one who ultimately says at the beginning what will happen in the end. And that's the concept. Rashi says, look at Galut Mitzrayim. We went down to Mitzrayim. When did we find out about Mitzrayim? We found out Mitzrayim when Yitzchak was born. Okay, we find out about Mitzrayim in the Brit Ben Abtarim Kiger Yezaracha Beretz Lo Lahem Vavadum Vinu Otam Arba Mot Shana. Right, it's going to be 400 years of enslavement. It was 210, 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak. Yitzchak was the first Jew to feel out of place. Avram Avinu was a prince among men. Avram Avinu had a role. Yitzchak was unfortunately the one who was first persecuted. So we see God was the one who knew from the beginning. But not just that, says the Ibn Ezra. No one can change the course of history that God has set in place. That ultimately, whatever God wants is going to happen. That anything from the early time, that everything has always come. There's nothing that didn't happen. I'm saying my desire, my thoughts will be fulfilled. Everything's going to happen. God says, I am God. What I set in motion, I will tell you in advance. So I'm telling you now, which means it's going to happen. Just like I told you then, and it happened. What I'm telling you now is going to happen. Korei mimizrach ayit. I am going to call from the east the ayit. There are two birds we confuse all the time, an ayit and a nesher. Okay, if you look in older translations and also in Art Scroll, a nesher is translated as an eagle, an ayit is translated as a vulture. Okay, Professor Yehuda Felix has proven the ayit is the eagle, the nesher is the vulture. Okay, the way this should be translated is I called the eagle from the east. And the eagle, as Professor Felix comments, is the symbol of many nations, such as America. We have the bald eagle. The eagle was this majestic figure, and he calls the eagle from the east. Who's the eagle from the east? Me'eretz merchak ish atzati, from the land which is of distant, a person who will follow my advice. According to Rashi, this is Avraham Avinu. In other words, this is a continuation of God saying, remember what happened in the past, and therefore don't be surprised about the future. According to the according to the Ibn Ezra, and many of the Meforshim, this is referring to Cyrus. Both came from the east, by the way. You know, Babylon is a place with a lot of people. Okay, both came from the place, and it's talking about the future. The Radak, he says, this is Melech Mashiach. So I am calling from the east the eagle, Ish Atzati. Okay, the person who is going to follow my advice, who's going to follow in my way, says Rav Hirsch. Afti Barti, I have spoken to him. I've spoken, Af Eviena, and I will bring him. Yatsarti, I've created, Af Esena. I have created and I will do. Dibarti Aviena, Yatsarti Esena. Parallels. But the Malbim doesn't like parallels. The Malbim says you got to find something new always. Okay. And the Malbim's point here is very simple. Malbim says, look at the two verbs, Dibarti and Yatsarti. Yatsarti, I know right away, is creation. It's creative. God created. Dibarti, therefore, is not a case of creation. Dibarti is just, I said, something's going to happen. Says the Malbim, there are going to be two things that are going to take place. There is going to be what we call natural, God working within nature, and there's going to be God working beyond nature. Dibarti is within nature, Aviana, and it will come true. Yatsarti is beyond nature. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to work beyond nature at the time of the Gulag, and he will make it happen. Shimu Elai Abirei Lev. Listen to me, Abirei Lev. How does ArtScroll translate Abirei Lev? Or Mamloes? How do they translate? Listen to me. Fierce-hearted. Interest. Fierce-hearted. That's following Rashi. Buried as Mamloes in his translation. How does he translate? Strong. Okay, strong-hearted. Okay. Rashi says that this is the people, these are the people who have been steadfast in their faith in God. They had the strong heart, okay, fierce, strong heart. The Abarbanel says, no, this is the hard-hearted, Abirei Lev. These are the people who are not doing the right thing. Okay, these are the Jews. Remember, we're talking about the end of the Babylonian exile into the building of the Beit HaMikdash. What happened at the end of the Babylonian exile? 43,000 Jews left Bavel to make Aliyah to Israel. The others didn't, and the 43,000, many of the 43,000 Jews who left were the people who had no status and had nothing in Galut. Of course, history never repeats itself. Okay, a lot of the 43,000s were the Nebuchs. They were Nebuchs. They may not have had good yichus, they may not have had good opportunity. They went and they made Aliyah. So says the Abarbanel, the Navi is saying, Shimu Elai Abirei Lev. Those of you who are stubborn, the hard-hearted ones, Harichokim Mitzdakah. Rechokim Mitzdakah, says the Abarbanel, you are far away from tzedakah mishpat. You hard-hearted ones are blowing it. You're making the mistake. Says Rashi, Rashi says this is the strong-hearted. These are the people I admire, the people who held strong. Okay, you have been, okay, you haven't seen the tzedakah mishpat. V'lo her'eti etchem tzidkati ligol. You weren't able to see until now. Okay, so what is it a pejorative or is it a compliment?
Well, that would be for Rashi, and despite the fact that you didn't see any charitable acts.
Right.
redemption.
Despite the fact you've been strong, even though you never saw the tzedakah. You've still hung in there. According to the Abarbanel, you are stubborn people. You are far away from what should be going on. And then he says, Kerafti tzidkatzi, and this is the last pasuk of the parak. Okay. I have drawn close my tzedakah, says the Abarbanel, despite who you are, despite that you are far from the tzedakah, I'm bringing you the tzedakah. I'm still going to redeem you, despite all of that. Lo tirchak, it won't be, despite your distancing yourselves from what's right, that right is going to come. It's not going to be far away from you. Or, according to Rashi, who says you've never seen it, well, now you're going to see the goodness, people. Uchuati, and my salvation, ta'acher, I'm sorry, Uchuati lo ta'acher, and my salvation will not be postponed, will not be far. V'natati v'tzion shua, and I'm going to give in Zion the salvation, liYisrael tifarti, to Israel my glory. Says the Abarbanel, this ultimate geula, and this is the ultimate geula. You are hard-hearted, you haven't paid attention. It's going to apply, the salvation, the redemption of the Jewish people is both to Zion and to Yisrael. Zion is the southern kingdom. Yisrael are the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom. Everyone is going to be brought back. Says the Radak, no. V'natati v'tzion shua, that in Zion will come the salvation, liYisrael tifarti, for the Jewish people, that salvation will be my glory. You'll see the glory of God through the salvation of the Jewish people. Says the Ibn Ezra, no. Yisrael tifarti, the Jewish people are my glory. Not my actions, but who you are will be my glory. And all of those possibilities are within these words of the pasuk. Ultimately, will God be proud of us? Ultimately, will we be proud of God? Ultimately, will God take care of all of us?
Nobody translates Sion as Yerushalayim.
See,
This is
right.
the first time you see Sion is connected to.
Well, the problem is I have, if I have Israel, if I take Israel as a place, and I have Zion as a place, Zion would seem to be broader than just Yerushalayim.
Is Yisrael.
Right.
Yisrael is connected with Israel. Sion is connected with Yerushalayim.
But I can't say no one. I didn't see it. I can't say no one. The advantage of, see, that's the advantage where the Abarbanel comes in. That Zion is a place, Israel is a place. If I say Zion Shua, if I just say it's Zion Shua, it could be, but then it's limiting. It's just Yerushalayim is going to be saved, right?
Well, okay, so here's how I was, before you
Go for it.
translated it, I was thinking that Sion Teshuvah, Sion, which in the future is, Jewish people don't see it now, but it's going to be decimated, destroyed.
Oh, okay.
Forever. Now it'll be a Teshuvah, it'll be.
Right. So the Datmi Mikra says that this is the Zion in that smaller place, that this will be part of the Geulah will be the rebuilding of Zion, and then the Jewish people will be coming back. All that is there. Okay, we're going to stop. We're going to stop right here. Okay. We're going to stop right here. Next week we're going to go back to the future next week. And for those who are here, you know what I mean. Okay. It'll be same time, same place. It's been a pleasure. Have a wonderful day, everyone.